Let's quickly look through example 6.2.4 in the study guide. So here I need you to remember that only directors are the parents, are the parent company. Okay, only the directors of the parent company are going to be disclosed in any note. And remember here we have welfare, which is the parent company. So we have parent company is welfare, and the subsidiary equals underdog. So the first step is to go and establish who the directors of the parent company are. Okay, if they're directors of both, that's okay, we're still going to include them. Okay, but that's the first step. Then we need to split up between executive and non-executive directors, right? And then you need to just establish whether the services or any costs that relate to the services relate to services to the subsidiary or to the parent, right? So let's go through now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write down a P next to each of the directors of the parent company. So Mrs. Sadsack, the widow of the late managing director of welfare. So that is definitely a parent company. Actually, I'm going to write down W, right? Welfare. So W is there. Mr. Wiffle is the director of Underdog for attendance at meetings at the board of directors. He got paid $2,000. And if I look down, I don't see anything else for Wiffle. So Wiffle is not a director of the parent company. So I'm just going to ignore him, right? I can put a line through his amounts. Mr. Poundseat, managing director of welfare. He'll definitely be in there. Mr. Tip Top, chairman of the board of directors of both companies for attending board meetings. So welfare, definitely a director. Mr. Yap, marketing manager of welfare. So is he even a director? No, he's not a director, right? He's a manager. So I'm going to cross him off our list. Not going to worry about his amount. Mrs. Wine, director of Welfare Limited for attendance at board meetings. That's probably going to be a non-exec, right? We'll go through that in a second. Mr. Epol, managing director of Underdog, but if I look a little bit lower down, I see he's also a director of welfare for attendance at meetings of the board of directors. So he's a non-exec director. So Mr. Epol, yeah, we're going to link him together, but he is a director. Okay. Mr. Fairwell, managing director of Welfare Limited. He was discharged on the 3rd of the 3rd, 19.5, before his contract had expired. So Mr. Fairwell, we will put through, yes, he was a director, right? So he's still going to include Mr. Fairwell, but look where the salary was paid out of. It was paid out of welfare. So he's still going to be included in this disclosures, right? Mrs. Figure is the accountant of both companies, not a director, right? So we cross her out. Mr. Top Top was compensated for Underdog Limited's entertainment expenses. So these were actual expenses in Underdog's books. So I'm not going to include that as it was an actual expense. It's not a director's remuneration. Okay, Mr. Poundseat and Mr. Yap both received a company car, and we'll look at that as part of the payments. Directors of welfare each received a traveling allowance of $1,500 per annum. That is part of their remuneration. And the managing directors belong to a pension scheme, and that will be partially part of the director's remuneration. So I've gone through, I've said which ones are part of the parent or directors of the parent and which ones are not. Then there's a couple of expenses, and now I need to have a layout for my workings, right? I'm going to do a working layout. I'm going to split it out as follows. I'm going to have executive directors, non-executive directors, and I'm going to have a column for the remuneration from the parent and the subsidiary for both. Remember, I'm just including directors of the parent, right? I'm going to have a whole calculation I'm going to do, and I'm going to get a total. I need to quickly show you what the end game is here, right? The end game is my disclosure in the notes. So on the final page, I've got the notes disclosures. And here I'm going to split up between executive and non-executive. And within that, I'm going to split up between emoluments, pension, and loss of office, get a total. I will then subtract the amount paid by subsidiaries, and I'll get a total paid by the company, the parent, which is W, right? Then for non-executive directors, the same story. I'm going to get emoluments, and I'm going to take off any amount paid by subsidiaries to get the total. Obviously, I have to go and do these calculations now, right? It's a reading exercise. I've done my identification of the directors of the parent. If I have to go and do my layout for the workings now, let's have a look. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and we'll highlight the figures as we hit them. So Mr. Poundseat got a salary of 36, lease of the motor vehicle 400 Rand times 6 months, a travelling allowance of 1,500, and pension fund contributions of 1,320. Where did I get those figures? Let's have a look quickly. Mr. Poundseat. I've gone and lost him for a second. Give me 1 second to find him. So Mr. Poundseat was the managing director of welfare. There's the 36,000. Okay. Then he also received the lease of the motor vehicle, so the company car, 400 Rand per month. Okay. So I take it 400 Rand times 6 months. Gave me my 2,400. Then there was a travelling allowance of 1,500 per annum, as well as the pension fund contributions, where there was 110 Rand per month, being the 1,320. Okay. So I can go through, and I've ticked all of those off. Mr. Tip Top. Here, take note, he was a non-exec, right? So he's under the non-exec column. And he received money from the parent and the subsidiary. So fees for attending board meetings, 21 and 17, and a travelling allowance. Done. Mrs. Wine, fees for attending board meetings, 5,000 as a non-exec director, and travelling allowance of 1,500. Mr. Epol received a salary of 32, fees for attending board meetings was 5, travelling allowance, pension fund contributions, 1,515 and 1,320. Take note, I'm splitting between the parent and the subsidiary. At the end of all of this, I'm going to go and add it up. And I get my totals for emoluments. Okay. And those totals, I'm going to now go and put in. So the 41,220 for executive directors, there it is, the 41,220. The amounts for the non-exec directors, 35 and 53. I'm going to add those up, and I get 88. There's my 35 and the 53. I added them up. Next up, I'm going to look at pensions, and Mrs. Sadsack got 6,000 and 4,000, didn't she? So here's my pensions, the 6,000 and the 4,000, 10,000. All summed up, summarized nicely, easy for users to read, right? Then there was also a loss of office. And the loss of office for Mr. Farewell was 10,000. And I put the 10,000 in. Then, look very carefully. I need to now pull up the amounts paid by the subsidiaries. So for executive directors, the amount paid by subsidiaries, I'm going to add up. And that was 4,000. Go and put that in. There's my 4,000 deducted, and the total paid by the parent company being welfare was 57,220. Same story for the non-execs. The non-exec directors, I add up the total and I have 53,320 paid by the subsidiaries. There it is. The amount paid by the parent being welfare is now 35,500. So nice and easy. Guys, you need to practice doing this. It's a reading comprehension exercise. Can you take all this information that was given to you? Can you decipher it? Can you pull out who is the director of the parent, who is the director of the subsidiary, right? Who is an executive director, who is a non-executive director? And then you will go and put that information into a useful calculation. You split between executive, non-execs. You siphon out all the people who shouldn't be in there, like the marketing manager, the accountant, the non-directors, people who are directors only of the subsidiary, take them all out. Then you split them up between emoluments, pensions, and loss of office. You then do your subtotals. Okay, splitting in between the parent and the subsidiary under each of the executive and non-exec directors. You will then get totals. Those totals will then form part of the summary in the disclosure, which is in the notes. The calculation's not in the notes, right? You do that in your workings. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how to do this. It's obviously going to be part of a bigger integrated question. So look out for all this detail. It takes time. You need to practice it, practice it, practice it. Thank you.